We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications, whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years. But the world is more sophisticated and prepared to march toward a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national auto-determination practiced in past centuries. Some even believe we, the Rockefeller family, are part of a secret cabal working against the best interest of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. That is the charge. I stand guilty, and I'm proud of it. This present window of opportunity, during which a truly peaceful and interdependent world order might be built, will not be open for too long. We are on the verge of a global transformation. All we need is the right major crisis, and the nations will accept the new world order. If the Council on Foreign Relations raises hackles of the conspiracy theorists, the Bilderberg meeting must induce apocalyptic visions of omnipotent international bankers plotting with unscrupulous government officials to impose cunning schemes on an ignorant and unsuspecting world. Everything is in its place after 500 years to build a true new world order in the Western Hemisphere. And what happens if we don't pass NAFTA? I truly don't think that criminal would be too strong a word for rejecting NAFTA. Somebody has to take government's place, and business seems to be the logical entity to do so. David Rockefeller. This is AllMinucOne. Please, folks, like, share, and subscribe if you enjoy my content. Leave a comment, make a comment, do that whole thing. Help me grow. Right now, with elections coming on, because I speak truth and because I say truthful things and because I endorse the president, I'm probably being suppressed right now. Hard to say. I'm a little channel anyway, so not that huge of a deal. But the more you share, the more you comment, the more you like, the more you interact, the more it helps the algorithm and the more I'll grow and get this word out. Now, I'm not saying things that other people haven't, but I'm coming from it at my own perspective. So you might ask, why am I reading you quotes from David Rockefeller? Well, he was the president, the leader of the Council of Foreign Relations. He created the Council of Foreign Relations. The Rockefeller family has been in banking for a very long time. They helped essentially create the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States. I'm not saying he's an evil man. He believes in what he believes. But the reality is, folks, our government is a government that is geared toward these ideas and globalism. And I just simply want to share some of my thoughts on that. Now, when I say all of this stuff to you, you could say it's a big conspiracy. David Rockefeller has quotes there and other ones about conspiracy theorists, but then he openly admits that these are his plans, and these people openly do. If you look at things like Agenda 21 from the UN, if you look at the World Health Organization and some of their plans, if you look at the World Economic Forum, which is talking about the Great Reset, they want to bring about. These are people in power who have money, who have influence, who want to subjugate you to their rule, not by election, not by your choice, and also not by, let's say, your locality. They want a world system. They think that that will prevent war. The issue is that it may prevent war, but they will kill, murder, rape, steal, do whatever they want to do to keep you from opposing it. If you want your liberty and freedom, you're just in the way, folks. You are just in the way. So I'm not going to go on forever about this concept or these ideas, but what I do want to cover today is some changes in political philosophy in the United States. And there are certain terms that you should be familiar with and understanding that the Republicans and the Democrats are not monoliths. However, the Democrats tend to back each other more, even if they don't fully agree. The Democrats are essentially full of neoliberals, and I will talk about them. But first, let's talk about paleoconservatism. So here from Wiki, very easily looked up, paleoconservatism is a political philosophy and variety of conservatism in the United States stressing American nationalism, Christian ethics, regionalism, and traditionalist conservatism. Paleoconservatism concerns overlap with these of the old right that opposed the New Deal in the 1930s and 40s. Well, what's the old right? The old right was an informal designation used for a branch of American conservatism that was most prominent circa 1910 to the mid-1950s, but never became an organized movement. Most members were Republicans, although there was a conservative Democratic element based largely in the southern United States. They were called the Old Right to distinguish them from the New Right, successors who had came to prominence in the 1950s and 60s. Think Richard Nixon. Among the latter, that is the Old Right, Barry Goldwater, who came to prominence in the 1960s and favored internationalist foreign policy to promote democracy and battle international communism. Or sorry, I guess he's part of the New Right, according to this. I was always under the impression that Barry Goldwater would be an old rightist, but I can be corrected, folks. New Right is a term for a variety of right-wing political groups or policies in different countries. It's been to describe the emergence of Eastern European parties after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The word New Right appeared during the 1964 presidential campaign of Barry Goldwater. Okay. To designate the emergence and response to liberalism in the American sense of the term. Social liberalism, not me liberalism, classical. Excuse me. Of an uninhibited right, ultra-conservative, imbued with religious values, openly populist, anti-egalitarian, and intolerant of racial desegregation. I don't know about any of that. That seems like a smear to me. The term became later used to describe a broader movement in the English-speaking world, socially conservative proponents of the night watchman state such as Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and New Zealand First. However, as Jean-Yves Camus and Nicolas Libourg point out, this leaning had only a few in common with the European New Right, blah, 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 whatever. I don't know about this anti-egalitarian thing. You might say anti-feminism. I don't know about egalitarianism, but whatever. Here, the racial intolerance, that's silly because, as I showed you the other day, the Republicans were the ones who essentially got the Civil Rights Act passed, even though they were the lesser house and the minority in the Senate. So let's go back to Old Right. So above all, the Old Right were unified by opposing or opposition to what they saw as a dangerous and domestic dictatorship by President FDR and the New Deal program. I would agree. Most were unified by the defense of natural inequalities, traditional limited government, and anti-imperialism, as well as their skepticism of democracy and the growing power of Washington. This would be correct according to, a constitutionalist mindset. Now, if you think that's a piece of paper that you can just wipe your, rear with, then whatever. I don't know. What makes America great then? If we don't have at least that basis of self-determined small government. The Old Right typically favored laissez-faire classical liberalism, so I would be considered on that end. Some were business-oriented conservatives, others were ex-radical leftists who moved sharply to the right, such as novelist John Dos Passos. I have no idea who that is. Still others, such as the Democratic Southern agrarians, were traditionalists who dreamed of restoring a pre-modern communal society. That sounds like tribalism and socialism. How that has to do with the old right, I don't know. Let's see, 12 American Southerners who wrote an agrarian literary manifesto in the 1930s, and they said their essay collection, I'll Take My Stand, the South, and the Agrarian Tradition. I'll have to read about that sometime. I'll bring that up. The All Right's devotion to anti-imperialism was at odds with the interventionist goal of global democracy, the top-down transformation of local heritage, social, and institutional engineering of political left and some of the modern right wing. Excuse me, folks. The All Right per se had faded as an organized movement, but many similar ideas were found among paleo-conservatives and paleo-libertarians, which we will get into. So this is the most important line of this, though, because this is what has actually happened. This isn't what you were told in your history books, folks. It's actually kind of amazing to find this on Wiki and not be tainted by some lefty propaganda. But this is the reality. The old right's devotion to anti-imperialism, because we became an imperialist nation under FDR in the Second World War, was at odds with interventionist goals of global democracy, meaning one world government. This stuff's very old. Top-down transformation of local heritage. Well, what's going on now? They're trying to do that with taking down statues and whatever else. Social and institutional engineering of the political left and some of the modern right wing. Well, we see that too. Who owns all of the institutions in the United States? The left does. They own the media, they own academia, they own the Democratic Party, of course, which is the largest party in the world. They have the most voters, although that might be changing here, and good for that. And anyways, they own all these institutions, folks. This is what's been going on. If you care about national sovereignty, if you don't want to be the world police, if you want to live and let live, you're essentially part of the old right. So let's see. The term neoconservative and paleoconservative were coined following an outbreak of the Vietnam War and a divide in American conservatism between the interventionalists and the isolationists. Those in favor of the Vietnam War became known as the neoconservatives, interventionalists, and they marked a divisive split from the nationalist isolationism of the traditionalist conservatives. Now, they use this word isolationism. It's a silly word. Non-interventionalism is a better word. Isolation means you cut off from everybody. This is what Japan did for, I believe, 400 years of its history. You literally kill whoever comes upon your shores. You don't let anybody in. No new technology, nothing. There's no one who's conservative that wants all that. They want to be out of global wars. They don't want our young men and women to be sent overseas and murdered, and they don't want them to have the scars of wars or to have to go murder people in foreign nations, especially considering those foreign nations have every right to decide how they will conduct their governments. According to the international relations scholar Michael Foyer, paleoconservative press for restrictions on immigration, a rollback of multicultural programs, and a large-scale demographic change, the decentralization of federal government policy, a restoration of controls upon free trade, a greater emphasis upon economic nationalism, and non-interventionalism in the conduct of American foreign policy. You could say, well, it says right below here, paleoconservative. Donald Trump is not a paleoconservative. But I'm about to say, you could say Donald Trump is very much within that scope right there. But rather a right-wing nationalist and populist. I don't know what you're going to make the difference between, because you just said that paleoconservatives are economic nationalists, and so is Donald Trump. And so is just about everybody that I know on the right, in the many facets of the right, except for those people who do want ethno-states, and those people really are leftists. They just call themselves on the right because they're socialist. You're not right-wing if you're a socialist. Socialism is a revolutionary radical movement. It's against our Constitution. That is left-wing. I say it over and over. I say it the way I say it because I'm so sick and tired of commies saying, "Oh, everyone's a fascist who is, right of Mao, who doesn't believe in what I say." Well, sorry, folks, but I'm right of Mao. I'm quite far right of Mao. I'm a federalist and a constitutionalist and a classical liberal, and yeah, I definitely don't want an ethno state or anything of that sort. So, anyways, let's go here to paleo libertarianism because it was mentioned. Let's see. It says paleo libertarianism is a political philosophy and variant of right libertarianism. Let's just go to that real quick because that seems silly. Right libertarianism, also known as libertarian capitalism or right-wing libertarianism, it's making this distinction because for a long time libertarianism was associated with communism. I don't know, or socialism at least. I don't know how you can't enforce it because the whole idea of a libertarian is non-interventionist, non-aggression principle, meaning if someone doesn't attack you or do something to you, you can't do something to them. Meaning you can't force them to be a communist if they don't want to be. So anyways, here it says a political philosophy, a type of libertarianism that supports capitalist property rights and defends market distribution of natural resources and private properties. That's called classical liberalism. The reason why libertarianism became a word, by the way, is because liberalism in the United States sense, a liberal was taken up by the progressives. Or the New Left. We're going to talk about them briefly. It says the term right libertarianism is used to distinguish a class of views on the nature of property and capital from left libertarianism, a type of libertarianism that combines self-ownership with egalitarian approach to natural resources. There is no egalitarian approach. That's not what egalitarian means. A school of thought within political philosophy that builds from the concept of social equality. Yeah, that's not equity. That's not handing people out the same thing. That's treating them the same. Our Constitution is based on egalitarianism. But let's look at left libertarianism real quick. Left libertarianism, also known as egalitarian libertarianism, left-wing libertarianism, social libertarianism, political philosophy and type of libertarianism that stresses both individual freedom and social equality. Right libertarianism does as well. This is just bunk. Represents several related yet distinct approaches to political and social theory. In its classical uses, it refers to anti-authoritarian varieties of left-wing politics, such as anarchism. So does right libertarianism, social anarchism, whose adherents simply call it libertarianism. In the United States, it represents the left wing of the libertarian movement and the political positions associated with the academic philosopher Helian Steiner, Philippe von Pages, I don't know how to say that, and whoever else. I'm not really ultra familiar with their writings because I come from the Austrian school when I was libertarian for the few years that I was. While maintaining full respect for personal property, left libertarians are either compliant, skeptical, or opposed to capitalism and private property ownership of the means of production. See, they're just commies. That's all that is. They're just commies, folks. I mean, I can keep going through it, but I'm not. So, right libertarianism supports free market capitalism, like most forms of libertarianism. It supports civil liberties, especially natural law, and negative rights, and a major reversal of the modern welfare state. Right, because the modern welfare state does not empower an individual, it enslaves them. That's a deeper philosophical perspective. So paleo-libertarianism, right? We have all these little different nooks and crannies developed by anarcho-capitalist theorists Murray Rothbard and Lew Rockwell. I don't know if Lew Rockwell was that influential on the development of this, but Rothbard for certain was. But again, Rothbard was an economist and not, I think, very well versed in psychology. And so anarcho-capitalism is a lovely theory, but it is such a utopian theory that it is no different really than anarcho-communism. There has to be some sort of minimalist government, folks, and that's really where I stand. I'm a minarchist. So it says, according to Rockwell, the paleo-libertarian movement harkens back to such thinkers as Ludwig von Mises, right? And that's who I was mentioning, the Austrian economist, who saved Austria from going into mass inflation right prior to the Third Reich takeover of Austria. It says, in the interwar old right that opposes the New Deal in favor of the old republic and distinguish themselves from neo-libertarians. Well, here's another one. See, just going down this rabbit hole, folks. Neo-libertarianism is a political and social philosophy that combines libertarians' moral commitment to negative liberty with a procedure and select principles for restricting liberty on the basis of a unanimous agreement in which everyone's particular interest receive a fair hearing. Now, if you go to my show, The Ends Justify the Memes, we just did this interview with Kizza GT, and he is essentially a neo-libertarian. Neo-libertarian has its roots in at least as far back as the 1980s when it was first described by James Sterba of the University of Notre Dame. Streba observed that libertarianism advocates for a government that does no more than protection against force, fraud, theft, enforcement of contracts, and other negative liberties, as contrasted with positive liberties by Isaiah Berlin. He contrasted this with older libertarian ideas of night watchman state and minarchism. Let's go into minarchism here in a second. Streba held that it is obviously impossible for everyone in society to be guaranteed complete liberty as defined by this ideal. After all, people actually want, as well as people's actual wants, as well as their conceivable wants, can come to serious conflict. It is also impossible for everyone in society to be completely free from the interference of other persons. This is true. And here's a quote. It says, "I shall show that moral commitment to the idea of negative liberty, which does not lead to a night watchman state, but instead requires sufficient government to provide each person in society with the relatively high minimum of liberty. That person using Rawlings' decision procedure would select the political program actually justified by the idea of negative liberty called neo-libertarianism." And from my understanding is essentially if you don't want the rights provided for you, then you just won't get them. So I guess night watchman and minarchism show up as the same link. And that's essentially night watchman state or minarchy is a model of a state that is limited and minimal, whose only function are to act as an enforcer of the non-aggression principle by providing its citizens with a military, police, and courts, thereby protecting them from aggression, theft, breach of contract, fraud, and enforcing property laws. Its proponents are called minarchists. And this, folks, this is what the United States federal Constitution was based out of originally. It wasn't until after the Civil War, or the start of the Civil War, with Lincoln declaring war on the South, and later the New Deal, that we got away from this idea. The federal government did not have the power and authority that it does today. That expansion of the federal government goes back to the progressive era and that new left and neoliberalism. So let's look at neoliberalism real quick. Neoliberalism is a political and social philosophy that combines the libertarians' moral commitment to negative liberty with a procedure that selects principles for restricting liberty on the basis of unanimous agreement in which everyone, particularly a particular interest, are received in fair hearing. Neoliberalism has its roots at least as far back as the 1980s when it was first described by James Sterba. Again. Oh, sorry, that's neo-libertarianism. My mistake. I meant to go to... I'm sitting here reading the same thing again. Neoliberalism is a 20th century resurgence of 19th century ideas associated with economic liberalism and free market capitalism. Not quite. It's more of a corporatist system, but this is what Wiki's going to say. It's generally associated with policies of economic liberalization, including privatization, deregulation, globalization, fair trade, austerity, and reductions in government spending in order to increase the role of the private sector and the economy and society. However, the defining features of neoliberalism in both thought and practice have been the subject of substantial scholarly debate. In policymaking, neoliberalism was part of the paradigm shift that followed the failure of Keynesian consensus. That is Lord Maynard Keynes, John Maynard Keynes, the economist who essentially still runs our economic policy. And it's just absolutely insane. It's the same stuff we've been doing since the New Deal. It's not good for Americans. It says in economics to address stagflation, that is essentially inflation. It'll give you a little definition here that the slow rates of this or that, but economic growth. No, it's inflation, folks. It is simply inflation. That's what stagflation is. It's going to happen. English speakers have used the term neoliberalism since the start of the 20th century by different meanings, blah, 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 blah. Social science critics, yada, yada, yada. What it really means. The definition and usage of the term have changed over time. In economic philosophy, neoliberalism emerged among European liberal scholars in the 1930s. This is the important part. And they attempted to revive and renew central ideas from classical liberalism as they saw these ideas diminish in popularity, overtaken by recognition of the need to control markets following the Great Depression and manifested in policies designed to counter the validity of free markets and mitigate the negative social consequences. First off, free markets are not that volatile. The system that we have now of this market-controlled, centralized system is very volatile. It's why we have a boom and bust cycle all the time. Ludwig von Mises was mentioned earlier. He received, if I'm not mistaken, a Nobel Prize on his market theory of economics that showed how the boom and bust cycle from centralized banks create this problem, and they always will. And what happens is the people at the very top continue to get very, very rich, and the people at the bottom get poorer. The reason why we have a minimum wage is because of inflation. There was no issue with the inflation in the United States when the United States was still on a gold standard. It didn't exist. It'll go on about things, but the reality is, economists Hayek, Milton, James Buchanan, along with politicians, policymakers such as Margaret Thatcher, Reagan, and Alan Greenspan. So that's what they're associated with. It says once the meaning of neoliberalism became established as a common usage among Spanish-speaking scholars, it diffused to English political economy. 1994, the passage of NAFTA, and the Zapatist reaction to the development of Chipas, the term entered global circulation. All of this, folks, is not anything to do with classical liberalism. It has to do with interventionism and corporatism. So I want to go here to neoconservatism. Again, this is just covering terms that you might hear a lot, understanding what's actually going on the left and the right. When you hear that, like, say, Hillary Clinton or Biden is a neoliberal, that's pretty much what they are, although the left is getting more and more progressive because they like to pander, and they believe they can gain control this way. So, neocon, this is really what I want to cover. So, neoconservatism is a political movement born in the United States during the 1960s among liberal hawks who became disenchanted with the increasingly pacifist foreign policy of the Democratic Party and with the growing new left. We'll get there in a minute. The counterculture of the 1960s, particularly Vietnam protests, some also began to question the liberal beliefs regarding domestic policies such as the Great Society. Now, if you remember, paleoconservatism, this was, that's paleo libertarianism, paleoconservatism, kind of came out of the same era. And then we have neoliberalism, also has its links in the same era. And we're going to see this. A lot of our politics today, folks, come from the 1960s. Now, you can read more than just wikis. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this stuff today. I just wanted to kind of gloss over this because it's important when we talk about politics. When you want to understand why there are people on the right, supposed right, there are Republicans, rhinos, if you would, who like the big government and they're supporting Joe Biden, which they never would have a million years ago. They would have supported Mitt Romney, who's really exactly the same as Joe Biden because Mitt Romney's a neocon. These people believe in the same kind of things. Neoconservatives typically advocate and promote of democracy and interventionism and international affairs, including peace through strength. So we could call this like the new right. By means of military force and are known for espousing disdain for communism and political radicalism. Critics of neoconservatives have used the term to describe foreign policy in war hawks who support aggressive militarism and neo-imperialism. So again, not like the old right who were anti-imperialist and anti-war hawks, right? This is a leftist movement. It said these people came from the left. Many of its adherents became politically influential during the Republican presidential administration of the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s, the administration of George W. Bush. Really, under Nixon, folks. Under Nixon. I'm going to show you a few of those people. Prominent neoconservatives in George W. Bush's administration include Paul Wutzowitz, Elliot Abrams, Richard Pearl, Paul Berman, and so forth. Obviously, Dick Cheney, while not identifying as a neoconservative, says Dick Cheney and Rumsfeld closely affiliated, blah, 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 blah. Historically speaking, the term neoconservative refers to those who made an ideological journey from anti-Stalinist left to the camp of American conservatism during the 1960s and 70s. The movement had intellectual roots in the magazine Commentary. I read from Commentary the other day. They spoke out against the new left in a way that helped define the movement. So we're going to go through here a little bit. I kind of want to get down into some of the things that happen. Let's go down to here because I think this is what I'm looking for. Throughout the 1950s and early 1960s, the future neoconservatives had endorsed civil rights movement, racial integration, Martin Luther King Jr. Again, though, these people are Republicans. I don't like neocons, but these are the racist Republicans who endorse these things. Just saying. From the 1950s to the 60s, there was general endorsement among liberals for military action to prevent communist victory in Vietnam. Right? Until the neocons came to power, there was no war started by the right. That's just a stupid talking point myth. It doesn't exist in United States history, folks. They were all Democrats starting global wars. Again, why do you think those neocons now aren't supporting Donald Trump? Because he was not involved in foreign wars. They like it when we go to war. It's big business for them. It's good money. Neoconservatism was initiated by the reputation of Cold War and the new politics in the American New Left. It was said was too close to the counterculture and too alienated from the majority of the population. Black Power, which accused white liberals and Northern Jews of hypocrisy on integration and supporting perceived settler colonialism and Israeli-Palestine conflict, yada, yada, yada. It says down here, many early neoconservative political figures were disillusioned Democrats, politicians, intellectuals such as Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who served in the Nixon and Ford administrations, and Jeannie Kirkpatrick, who served the United States ambassador to the United Nations and the Reagan administration. A substantial number of neoconservatives were originally moderate socialists associated with the right wing of the Socialist Party of America and its successor, Social Democrats USA. Max Stochman, a former Trotskyist theorist who developed a strong antipathy toward the New Left, had numerous devotees among the Socialist Democrats of the USA, with strong links to George Meany's, AFL-CIO. Following Stochman and Meany, this faction led the SP to oppose immediate withdrawal from the Vietnam War and oppose George McGovern in the Democratic primary race, to some extent the general election. They also chose to cease their own party building and concentrated on working with the Democratic Party, eventually influenced through the Democratic Leadership Council. Thus, the Socialist Party dissolved in 1972. The SDUSA emerged that year. Most of the left wing of the party, led by Michael Harrington, immediately abandoned them. Leaders associated with the neoconservatives include Carl Gushman, Penn Kimball, Joshua, whoever. I don't really care about the names, folks. But rejection of the left was from people who were on the left. And a lot of what they took came with them. It says, as the policies of the new left made the Democrats increasingly leftist, these intellectuals became disillusioned with President Lyndon Baines Johnson's Great Society, domestic programs, influential 1970 bestseller, Real Majority, expressed that the real majority of the electorates endorsed economic intervention, but also social conservatism, and warned Democrats could be disastrous to opt liberal positions in certain social and crime issues. None of this, by the way, is talking about the original intent of the Constitution or the Founding Fathers or any of that stuff. Neoconservatives reject the counterculture New Left and what they considered anti-Americanism and non-interventionalism. They like intervention. It's interesting, this one guy's a Trotskyite, because if I'm not mistaken, Trotsky actually didn't want world communism, he's one of the few. Stalin thought differently, and therefore Trotsky went bye-bye. The Democrats among them endorsed Washington Senator Henry Scoop Jackson instead of unsuccessfully. You guys can read the best. Let's look at the New Left real quick. New Left was a broad political movement, mainly from the 1960s and 70s, consisting of activists in the Western world who campaigned for a broad range of social issues, including civil and political rights, feminism, gay rights, abortion rights, gender roles, and drug policy reforms. Sounds like what's going on today. Some saw the New Left as an oppositional reaction to earlier Marxist and labor union movements for social justice that focused on dialectical materialism and social class, while others using the term as the movement that can as a continuation and revitalization of traditional leftist goals. Yes, leftist goals. If you were on the left, this is what you want. Otherwise, you're mistakenly on the left, folks. Some who self-identify as the New Left rejected involvement with the labor movement and Marxist historical theory of class struggle, although others gravitated to their own takes and established forms of Marxism, such as New Communist Movement, which drew from Mao, the United States, or the K-Gruppen in Germany. And the United States, the movement was associated with the anti-war college campus protest movement, including the free speech movement. Of course, that doesn't exist anymore amongst the left because now they've moved along against class struggle and materialism, and now it's just about power and authority and who gets to say what. Because leftism is always, via first principles, might makes right. The democracy, if you would, is mob rules. So that brings me here, because these are important people within the Nixon administration that brings us up to date, more or less. So this is Misha Brzezinski's father, that is Joe Scarborough's wife on Morning Joe. So this is Zerbigniew, or the Big Z, as he was often called. He was a Polish-American diplomat and political scientist. He served as counselor to President LBJ from 66 to 68 and President Jimmy Carter. Brzezinski belonged to the Realist School of International Relations. So there's a picture of Machiavelli. It says, realism is one of the dominant schools of thought in international relations theory, theoretically formalizing the realpolitik statesmanship of early modern Europe. Essentially, this is foreign intervention. Standing on the geopolitical tradition of Halford Mackinder and Nicholas Skykman, Brzezinski was the primary organizer of the Trilateral Commission. Now, I talked earlier about the CFR. Let's look at the Trilateral Commission. This is a non-governmental, nonpartisan discussion group founded by David Rockefeller. Oh, yeah, he found that as well. In July 1973 to foster closer cooperation between Japan, Western Europe, and Northern America. And this is all about trade relations and trade policies. Now, I get that there are going to be people who are of influence doing this, but when it's the same people over and over again dictating these things to folks, and it's not elected folks. They're not elected. Let's look at what David Rockefeller said here. We are grateful to the Washington Post, New York Times, and Times magazines and other publications and directors who have attended our meetings and respected our promises of discretion for almost 40 years. Meaning, if they said this to the public would have been upset. So it says here, major foreign policy events during his lifetime in office included normalizing relations with the People's Republic of China and sever the ties with China on Taiwan, strategic arms limitations, Camp David Accords, and so forth. But the main thing is, folks, I don't want to keep this up because I'm already almost at 45 minutes, but the main thing is I want to show you is these people who are of influence. When you see Mika Brzezinski on the Morning Joe with Joe Scarborough, this is her father, right? Do you really think that she doesn't believe in these globalist, one world government type policies? Now, most of you probably know Henry Kissinger. He's quite famous. Diplomat, politician, geopolitical consultant, Under President Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford, Jewish refugee of Nazis, blah, 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 blah. Secretary of State, 1973. For his actions negotiating a ceasefire in Vietnam, he received a Nobel Peace Prize. And a practitioner of realpolitik. Okay, so Zerbinski was on the left, Kissinger on the right. Yet they practice the same kind of foreign policy. So you have to understand this. Understand what these people actually are. And again, I'm not going into this as a deep dive. I just wanted to show you how there are different terms out there. These are all people on the right, paleoconservative. The old right, that would be someone, I would consider myself part of the old right, a classical liberal. It says right here, laissez-faire classical liberalism. That I'm saving for later. Paleo-libertarianism, neo-libertarianism, Night Watchman state, I believe in that. Neoliberalism, now this, I think later on gets into it a little bit more, but what essentially neoliberalism is today is, it says here, neoliberalism state intervention and brought a clash with the opposing laissez-faire camp of classic liberalism like Ludwig von Mises. Yeah, they want economic intervention all the time. Neoconservatives, all that. Then we looked at the New Left very briefly. But look, these are the people, the Trilateral Commission, these are the people setting foreign policy, folks. These are the people that are expanding the global government and global power. I'm just going to play this little clip. This is nothing new. You've probably seen this, but this is old Joe Biden on Ukraine. And the big thing that you need to take away from this
I just want to put one other issue on the floor before
he's at the Council of Foreign Relations,
which is Ukraine. This administration, unlike the administration you worked in, decided to provide limited defense articles to Ukraine. Do you think that was a wise decision? And more broadly, do you see any scope for any sort of a deal on eastern Ukraine?
The answer is yes, I think it was a wise decision. But then again, I was pushing that for 2 years before we left. So, and the reason is I think the more you up the ante, the cost to Russia for their aggression. I mean, as you all know, and you know this better than anybody, the one big lie going on about Ukraine back in the rest of Russia is that no Russian soldiers are engaged, they're not dying, no body bags are coming home, etc.
So this is also the thing where he said that he was going to break up the investigator who's looking into Burisma. And of course, we know from this past week that Hunter Biden was kicking back money to his father, or so it appears. But this is interesting too, because here's old Dick Cheney.
New York-based Council on Foreign Relations provides a window to the real story. The speaker, Vice President Dick Cheney, takes a question from David Rockefeller.
Vice President, I just enjoyed so much your whole speech, but I was particularly pleased that you gave such a strong endorsement for the free trade agreement for all the Americas, subject that has been of great concern to me for many years, and particularly recently, and I think it's absolutely essential for the strength of our economy.
Rockefeller's role in the drive...
Speaking of which, folks, that NAFTA was not good, which is why Trump recently renegotiated it. We have a better trade deal now.
For an FTAA was a lot more central than he portrays. Rockefeller cultivated Latin American leaders who could be counted on to support such a proposal. Both the 1994 Miami Summit and the FTAA proposal were conceived and nurtured by a Rockefeller-created network.
Now, Dick Cheney was there. Of course, there's a video clip you can find online if you haven't seen it before, where he's like, oh, I didn't talk about how I was part of the Council of Foreign Relations. It's good to be back, while I was running. Well, why is that? Because it doesn't look good that these multi-millionaires, 100 millionaires, some of them billionaires, are unelected and dictating our foreign policies. So the reason why I went through all these different little things here was just to show you that the right generally is not unified, but the people who are running the government, like Kissinger back in the day, or Brzezinski, they're globalists and they're moving things along, and Donald Trump isn't, and that's why he's so well hated, and that's why the media will go after him. So before I get out of here, let me read you one last quote from Rockefeller. Whatever the price of the Chinese Revolution, it has obviously succeeded not only to produce more efficient and dedicated administration, but also in fostering high morale and community of purpose. The social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history. That was David Rockefeller. Folks, the Maoist regime was horrible. You don't want that. And I know there are crazy communists out there that do, but you don't want that. David Rockefeller is there praising it. Why? Because that is the reality. That is the thing that they are searching for. They want this sort of communistic welfare state, if you would, where the business leaders, they get to have everything, and they get to have their money, and you're just a little plebe who gets to participate and survive as long as you tote the line. Now, I want to bring you back to, what was the one quote here? I got to find it. Global crisis, global transformation, a major crisis, and the nations will accept the New World Order. Well, what did I talk about the other week with the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the Great Reset? Guys, I don't care. You call me a conspiracy theorist. They blatantly, openly talk about this. It's not conspiracy theory. It is openly talked about. It's openly divulged. I'm not saying they're all sitting in a room and twisting their mustaches going, doing their perfect Skeletor impression. I'll get you, He-Man. They're not doing all that, right? But they are meeting, and they are talking, and they are friends, and they do have plans, and it has nothing to do with what you voted for. So vote for the guys, the people that say they actually represent you and not trying to sell you some scheme. Or don't vote. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. Vote for whoever you like. If you're a commie, you want to vote for a commie, go vote for a commie. I think you're asking for some bad juju, but do it. In any case, if you guys want to check out a live show every Wednesday, TheEnds _justify_memes. Replays on YouTube, TheEnds justify the memes. AllMinucOne itself has a subscribe star if you'd like to go on that and donate to me. If not, whatever. I'm going to keep doing my thing. Please like, share, subscribe. And hey, folks, be well.